Hello and welcome to Boosting Employability in South Africa through Skills Education, a webinar discussion held in partnership between Times Higher Education and Coursera for Campus. My name is Ashton Wemborn and I'm the Special Projects Deputy Editor at THE. I'll be chairing today's session. We're joined by a panel of experts and decision makers from South Africa's higher education sector. So I would like to introduce David Kabwa, President of the Student Representative Council at the University of Pretoria, Miles Thies, Director of Digital Learning Services at Eiffel Corp, Brenda Martin, Director of the Career Service at the University of Cape Town, Sandile Songa, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Francis Quirk, Director of Partnerships at Coursera, and Nikki Williamson, Instructional Designer and Training Facilitator at Eiffel Corp. So thank you to our panel for joining us today and to our audience for tuning in as well. We'll be taking questions from the audience throughout today's session. You can see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have any questions, please send those in and we will address those throughout the session. South Africa is facing a period of record high unemployment, with the COVID-19 pandemic adding more pressure to an already unstable job market. The country's universities have the opportunity to tackle this issue by ensuring their students are taught the skills they need to become employable graduates and collaborate with industry on both the national and international level. However, this creates new strategic challenges for higher education leaders to overcome. So I'd like to begin today's discussion by asking how skills education helps to produce more employable graduates and how institutions can embed this skills education into their own strategies and curricula. Maybe we can start today with David, please.
Right, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity on this platform. Right, so skills development is absolutely key. And what we need to see is the intersection between praxis and pedagogy. There are very many institutions of higher learning that have programs specifically designed to ensuring that graduates get more than simply the theoretical underpinnings that are related to their degree. In the University of Pretoria, we have the Ready for Work program, which recently was awarded as the best work readiness program by the Graduate Association within South Africa, which was very promising. And essentially what this program seeks to do is teach students the skills that are needed beyond the classroom. These skills range in everything from how to engage within an interview space, to project management, to ensuring that one is able to assimilate very well within the workspace. As you may have seen that right now employers are not only looking for someone who qualifies, but someone who will mesh well within a particular team. Now, the way this relates to South Africa as a whole is, as you've mentioned, we're seeing very record high numbers. I believe, according to Stats South Africa, it was about 34% in the third quarter. And the fourth quarter projections are ranging between 44 to 46%, which is considered to be a record high. And because we are seeing such high numbers, the time is now more than ever. What I mean earlier when I touched on praxis and pedagogy is the fact that we need to get to a point where what we are teaching in skills development mirrors what we see in the real world, and that is intersectional and intersectional collaboration and also transdisciplinary collaboration. You spoke on how the business sector is affected, employers are affected, graduates are affected, and here we see a bunch of different sectors within our economy, within our socioeconomic space that do not operate in silos. Therefore, our academia and our skills development cannot. Therefore, in summary, the best way to address this issue is to ensure that we expose our students to the skills development at a very early stage, that it becomes optional so that it does not interfere with the actual coursework that students are doing, and also that it mirrors what is happening within our contemporary society so that we do not operate in silos. And once we do that, we'll be able to adequately adjust to the socioeconomic dynamics that we're seeing, not only within the university space, but also within our country as a whole.
Thank you, David. You mentioned avoiding interference between that skills training and students' curricula. Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit of background noise there. I don't know if you're able to just quickly mute yourself, sorry. Thank you. That interference between skills training and the course that students have come to universities to learn. And I suppose we need to break down the idea that there is interference. These things need to work together, and you spoke about silos, and it's breaking down those sorts of barriers between different kinds of skills training. So Brenda, I'm interested to hear what your institution is doing in terms of making skills training kind of part of a holistic learning experience, both at university and perhaps beyond as well.
Yes, thank you. So the work that I do is within the career service, and it's a centralized model within the University of Cape Town. So we offer services across the entire institution to all of the faculties, and we develop relationships with faculty, different faculty leaderships, so that we can ensure that we're offering something that's relevant to each of the faculties, because they're very diverse, even within faculties. Departments are very diverse. So the efforts, as you can imagine, in relation to skills are also diverse. First of all, we need to understand that higher education institutions have not traditionally been spaces where skills have been a focus. You know, it has been a lot around scholarship and research and theory and so on. So the notion of skills has mainly been associated with the professions, and historically. More recently, there's been recognition of things like interdisciplinary skills that are valuable in terms of enhancing employability. And then there's also been a recognition of the need to think about skills right from year one. So we work with a student development journey. We look at each year of a student's time at the university, and we look at different opportunities that should be made available to them right through to the moment they graduate. And we see sort of the work readiness stuff as the preparation for interviews. Those are specific work readiness skills, but there are many other work readiness skills that relate more to the actual employment contract and ensuring that a graduate is more attractive as an employee. Yeah, so a lot of many different interventions. There's curriculum interventions where faculties have actually, or departments, I should say, have actually already taken note of industry trends and then adjusted curriculums to ensure that, for instance, you have film production students who are needing to go out into a market now that doesn't want a team, wants one individual that's going to be able to complete a project end to end. That curriculum needs to adjust to that. Then you've got more informal stuff, and yeah, pick up on David's point around enabling, the kind of just making sure that things can happen for students, addressing timetable clashes, and ensuring that there's not a frowning on or watering a sense that degrees are watered down when you do interdisciplinary work. So there's a lot of focus from an institutional perspective, which is literally about enabling. The rest is more formalized, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much. Francis, did you want to jump in there? Sorry, I'm going to have to say it.
Always. I just said it, didn't I? Always on mute. Just a point or a question. Curious, Brenda, how do you get well, and anyone really on the call, how do you get the split right between we need you to do this interdisciplinary, content creation, skills development outside of your 4-credit learning program? How do you get that split right? Because one of the things we hear a lot from institutions in South Africa, generally across Africa, anywhere, is we need them to finish the degree and we need them to then get a job. And we don't want them to be doing all of this work to the side because it distracts them, it takes the focus away. So how do you get that split right of embedding these skills?
often it comes down to champions, and I'm sure that our colleague at University of KwaZulu-Natal will have more to say on this topic as well. But often it comes down to having academic champions who recognize and value this interdisciplinary aspect, because structurally there are many constraints. Subsidies are linked to throughput rates, completion rates, the timetable clashes I mentioned. There are things like just actually exhaustion, and at the moment that's a big factor. We have to take into account the load that students are working with. So there's a lot that comes through as a result of champions that make things possible and enable things. But I do think that there's got to be one of the shifts that our institutions will have to make is how to manage interdisciplinary work and ensuring that it's much more possible for that to happen.
Nikki, please go ahead and jump in as well.
Thanks. I just wanted to also advise, I've seen this done at a lot of institutions really well, is as part of your curriculum review team, you actually have experts within your industry. So if you're working, say, with the pharmacist, you're training in pharmacy, you have some experts from industry, from the hospital pharmacies that you involve in your curriculum development. So that just helps so that it makes sure that you will not just align in terms of academic work, but also in terms of skills development and what those learners actually need.
Mm-hmm.
And David, please, as well.
Right, sorry, I was struggling with the mic. Yes, it's a brilliant contribution that was made. You'll notice most institutions of higher learning now allow for many platforms for young people, many platforms for students. And within the leadership space, we see that develop quite heavily. Within the University of Pretoria, we have more than 400 student structures. Among those structures are societies that we divide into different categories. Within those categories as well are also academic societies that essentially move with an academic mandate. We have an AI and robotics society. We have a society on Greek, on Sotho, on Venda, and everything in between. And oftentimes you'll find that the students who join these societies, who serve within the executive, or even those who participate within their activities, are oftentimes students from very diverse, very different disciplinary backgrounds. So that's also a good mechanism that can be used to expose students to a more diverse skill set, especially in terms of an operational means, which allows students to really get the practical element that they're able to apply moving forward. And on top of that, they do get some form of recognition, certificates, medals, exposure that is very important towards creating students that are more employable in the future.
Thank you, David. And Sandil, did you want to also jump in there?
Thank you, I do. You know, the notion of deliberately introducing programs for the preparation of students for the world of work, service, and entrepreneurship is coming into the curriculum now, not as a nice to have, but more as something that students actually are calling for, because they realize that without that preparedness, they struggle in the application for jobs. And it is therefore being brought into the curriculum as an attractant, and students rush to it. They do not kind of say, okay, this thing is not going to give me any credits, but they say, credits or no credits, I want that thing. And most of our schools and our colleges are bringing that into the curriculum, whether the core curriculum or the main curriculum. The thing about the division between employment and the skill sets for employment, apart from the theoretical skill sets that are required in the knowledge space in the main curriculum, is that when there is a critical mass of workplace skill sets for employability in the economy, it is an attractant for investment in that economy, because people come in, investors, whether local or from abroad, because they know there's somebody there who's going to do the job. But if the skill set are not appropriate for the economy and the workplace, it tends to chase the industry away because they think, look, you invest there, you look for people, they are not appropriate for the workplace. And this is one of the things that is driving the universities to be relevant for attracting local investment as well as foreign direct investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Miles, please jump in as well. And then we've actually got a question from the audience that I'd like to put to the panel as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think great points that have been made so far. I think it's important to point out this is not a new issue. I mean, universities and industry have been dealing with this problem, probably since universities first came about and the preparedness of students actually ready for the workplace. I mean, that's a debate that's been going on as long as whose responsibility is it? Is the universities to create that ready student for the workplace, or is it the workplaces to take a prepared student and then give them the skills so they can function at a higher level that the workplace is expecting them to? But I think particularly for universities, I mean, they are kind of the entry point for a lot of this discussion, and obviously because students are spending the bulk of their training lives within the institution. I mean, the onus is really on them to kind of create the opportunities for industry. Industries continuously going to kind of push and make a need for kind of really qualified graduates. And as I mean, the effect of technology, it's only accelerated things. So I mean, that's potentially some of the challenge here is that as the need for ready graduates comes about, and obviously, I mean, it's here in South Africa, it's a lot more acute because we have a major issue around unemployment. So they're seeking skills outside of that because of they have to seek that for their own livelihoods. You aren't just trying to find a job which is competitive enough. The industries, they really have to kind of tie those ties with industry as quickly as possible and create opportunities to collaborate, because it's really the way that we're going to kind of get around a problem like we have here locally. But more importantly, I mean, the universities, as I say, are the ones that really kind of own this discussion. So, industry is going to go and find other ways of creating graduates for themselves. I mean, to that point, we've actually worked with one particular initiative in Pakistan where the industry bodies themselves were actually looking to create a qualification outside of the formal accreditation criteria because of the readiness of the graduates from the university weren't quite meeting their needs. So I mean that obviously points to a significant breakdown. I mean that's a real sign that things aren't working and something we'd like to avoid. But it just shows that industry, with the types of pressures they have, will try and find a solution, and that means that universities really have to innovate very, very quickly to be able to stay relevant. And I mean I know it's an uncomfortable discussion to be had at universities, but that's something that really needs to be taken to the fore.
Thank you,
Ashton. Sorry, Ashton. One thing before we move on, just on Miles's point. One of the things that concerns me the most is I actually do a little bit of work on the corporate side at Coursera. And I know we were just saying there, Miles, and I think a lot of you have said let's connect closer to industry, but actually I work with industry too. And I sit with them and have similar conversations. What skills are needed in your industry? What's the skill proficiency of your employees? And they say, not sure. What do you think? So there's still a huge gap. We're looking at industry and saying, you guys must know. But actually, they're looking at their, 5,000 employees and saying, are our employees with the kind of skills that we need? So I think there's also, where else should we be looking to get some insights around the skills development we need?
I mean, this perfectly addresses the question that we've had from the audience, which is really about collaboration with industry. And I suppose if industry and institutions don't know whose job it is to decide what to equip graduates with, then we're telling graduates to learn how to collaborate, but actually maybe there's some real room to get those different stakeholders in a room together to discuss what that pathway from undergrad or from study into employment needs to look like. I don't know if anyone on our panel has an idea. Brenda, please jump in there.
I was nodding vigorously because I think it is a conversation and a dance. I think that one has got to be very careful about interest. So anybody who's offering an opinion in the space, they've obviously got an interest in the conversation. there's a definite, from our perspective, given that we put the students at the center and we look at what is it that students need and what it is that they are asking for. My impression is that students have their own ideas around what it is that they want, what kind of companies they want to work for, what kind of skills they want to be offering, and what those should be marketed at, which kinds of levels. So there's a lot of importance that we place on agency and that voice of the student. But then there's contributions that can come from industry, and there are contributions that can come from faculties. And when I say faculties, I mean the academic space, of course. So there's a need, I think, where my view on this, and I don't have firm views on all of these topics. The one position I have on this is that there's got to be a diverse conversation, and it cannot be dominated by any interest group. And it's got to be something that is benefiting from diversity. That, for me, is a big priority. Yeah.
Thank you. Sandil, do you have that same idea about diversity being key in these conversations?
Indeed, diversity does have a critical role to play. I can't resist telling you a short story of what I did when I was still at Walter Sisulu University to deal with this skills gap. I set up an MOU with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, which is sort of kind of a private, if you could say, a private entity. For the people at the CSIR to come and spend some time with us at the university. These are really skilled researchers, and also our own researchers and our students to spend time at CSIR, as opposed to like your advisory boards, which are talk platforms. We decided to go to presence areas, and these people would come to Walter Sisulu University and teach our courses and our students. And they unpack the industry-related problems to our students, and they would brainstorm what are the skills required, and what is the knowledge required. And equally so, our researchers and our people would go to CSIR and experience what CSIR does and experience what are the opportunities for bridging these gaps. I think today, the model that is required is to go beyond your advisory board into your presence kind of interaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And David, we'd love to hear from you as well.
I appreciate that. I particularly want to appreciate Brenda's point on the importance of recognizing the student-centric approach. I think that's of paramount importance. But also just to add on to the notion of collaborations. Collaboration allows for exposure. And when we really look into the nitty-gritties of it, what most students are looking for is some means by which they can get a foot in the door, which is why exposure is so important. At the University of Pretoria, we have the best law faculty in Africa. And one thing we've been very grateful to see is how all of the top law firms, they'll come and at least once a term, once a quarter, they'll visit our students. And students have the opportunity to engage with those within the sector directly, prepare themselves, know what they need to know. And you'll find that the success rate of students entering into the workplace and that faculty is very high. Then we also see instances of students creating their own agency, as we spoke of. We have many different societies. There's a consultancy society that engages with many different firms, and they've created platforms by which students can apply. I need to appreciate the career services as well. Literally every single day on my student email, on my alumni page, I get emails of offers, of vacancies, of availabilities that do exist for students. So again, we see exposure. And lastly, we find sort of non-conventional means within the university space. One thing I would do is I would regularly attend meetings of the provincial legislature, particularly the Portfolio Committee on Finance. And one thing I told them is, whenever you invite me, allow me to take students. So whenever I go with a group of about 15 or more students. And there was, 2 or 3 students who would always attend every single meeting. They made sure they were there. By the end of the year, the 2 of them got job offers. And when they got the offers, they said, you know what, I want to pay this back. I want to give the way that it was given to me. And it started a trend where we see students trying to allow for more exposure within the space. So again, in summary, I think collaboration is key, because collaboration allows for exposure that would otherwise be non-existent. And it is that exposure that is necessary for students to enter the workspace.
Thank you, David. That's very interesting. Miles, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, again, I mean, great points. And I think a lot of what our fellow panelists are talking about here, I mean, it implies that there's quite a bit of flexibility in the way that, particularly a program is presented. So, I mean, maybe this is encapsulated in a question that some of the other panelists could answer is, what are the types of aspects that are coming into programs that allow for that flexibility? And we're thinking of things like assessment, in terms of projects that need to be completed, because they're quite, you're clearly working potentially with industry bodies to help achieve some of that, the experiential type of aspects. In other parts of the world, I've noticed, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility in the way that programs are offered, especially in the experiential thing. I know that the UK, that's changed slightly recently, but I mean, how is that supported in the university space? And it's particularly from a sort of Council of Higher Education perspective, and what are they doing to be able to allow for that type of flexibility to happen? Because I think that's a key aspect to this.
I'd like to add to Miles's question there about flexibility with something that one of our audience members has raised, which is that faculty and staff time is a really key resource that perhaps is running low at the moment. There's obviously been a huge amount of change to delivery and courses over the last 18 months with that shift online. And how do you continue to provide and increase that flexibility that Miles spoke about, but without having that burnout that I think a lot of staff members seem to be suffering from? If there's no support to do this kind of overhaul, then you're not going to get the outcomes that really benefit students and employability. Do any of our panelists have something to raise on that? Sandil, please go ahead.
I think we now know that there is never a good student-staff ratio to accommodate all the curriculum and co-curriculum requirements in higher education especially. And therefore, the innovations that, for example, are like the innovation that I talked about, which I when I was a Walter Sisson, and other innovations which require staff to collaborate amongst themselves and amongst students, tapping into a whole host of available resources, both within the institution and outside the institution, particularly in the workspace. That is the way that is going to ameliorate the workload in the ways in which students will be exposed to the workplace appropriately. The key thing in the workplace is to be able to have the capability of discerning what it is that is required. What is the problems? What are the problems that needs to be solved there? And the capability also to be able to mount up solutions for these problems. Typically then you see universities advancing innovations such as research preparation for students still in the undergraduate, so that they have the skills for systems thinking, problem solving, mounting research, and be able to immediately see problematic areas that can be solved to give the industry the competitive advantage. But the lecturers are not enough. Academics just weighing, they're not enough, and they're not going to be enough anytime soon.
Thank you. Brenda, do you see a way forward with this issue?
Well, the silver lining with the pandemic, I think, is all of the options that are available online for online learning. So our Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at at UCT has just, their work has completely expanded, and lots of that work has been around helping faculty members to use these skills, online skills and tools to be able to do more with their time. And recording sessions is a big, or on its own, it's a big bonus. But there's quite a few interesting initiatives that are happening that are student-led again. They are, we did an ecosystem survey around entrepreneurship. And in that process of doing that work, we realized how rich this ecosystem is within our campus. And so the student-led initiatives, the initiatives that are run by student faculty member collaborations, and then industry, faculty, and student-led collaborations together. So there's a lot going on in terms of people drawing on one another and ensuring that there's a real awareness of the fact that there's never going to be, the resources are never going to arrive. We're not going to have better budgets next year, or every single year we're faced with budget cuts. So innovation is a big part of this, and then online learning. And I think the more that we can share between institutions as well. So I really appreciate Sandila's sharing there, because we don't have to always find these solutions from scratch. We can build on one another's solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And you mentioned the value of those digital tools. And Francis, I'd be really interested to see if Coursera has seen any patterns in terms of the way that students are engaging with digital tools and the potential that those tools have for really easing that skills training for those employability outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Ashton. Just the whole innovation is such a big and exciting word and phrase. I think we push around a lot at the moment. We talk a lot about it. Some of the challenges we definitely see around the online learning space is the high quality online learning. And you're just saying there, Brenda, about moving online, and we record our lectures, we put them online, and I think that's really been the shift that we've seen. A lot of institutions, I think we probably say this a lot, don't we? COVID obviously accelerated all of this. All the time I'm being told by deputy vice chancellors, vice chancellors, deans, we've wanted to do this online thing for ages, and COVID just really helped us to do it. But the problem is it ticked a lot of boxes, but it also ticked a lot of boxes in terms of how we deliver high quality or really good quality content online. And I think at the moment we see a lot of institutions that have a lot of recordings, a lot of content available, but a lot of that is just for students to go in, look at, engage with, and then sort of leave. So how do we create that online piece? I think is the next sort of stage to how we'll do blended, how we'll do hybrid better. The other piece to it, and Coursera and myself personally, there is a huge amount of content creation, not just in South Africa or Africa, but generally around the world. We'd love to create content, and there's nothing wrong with creating content. We want to create content, we want to contextualize things, but every university is creating content on introduction to AI. Is that a useful amount of energy going into baseline subjects like that? And just as an example, one of our partners in Kenya, thought, well, we want to embed these sort of AI digital skills that are missing in our students in this country, on the continent. Why would we go off and create all this content when we can be giving this to our learners and embedding that into what we're doing? So there's some really exciting ways where our academics in country can be contextualizing this. We can focus on creating content around our industries, our countries, our opportunities and our challenges, and almost be saying, are there opportunities to say, what's the basis of the introduction to AI? What's the basis of introduction to data science? And bring that in from around the world, bring that kind of international experience and exposure. And I think there's really exciting opportunities. And as an organization, we've seen partnerships globally with universities where we're saying, let's bring in some of these most emerging trends and skills without having to have our staff be overstretched. But there's still a great opportunity to be creating content. And maybe Miles, I'll hand to you, because I know that that's an area that you do a lot of work with institutions on as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Francis. Thanks. And also linking to what Brenda was saying as well. I mean, the content is such a key part of that, but I think, like we've all been saying, it's critical to have the right types of facilitation skills to be able to effectively weave what you're presenting online into online teaching effectively. And I think, I mean, I'd like to call on Nikki to answer this, because I mean, she leads a lot of our workshops, and I mean, she's at the proverbial coalface in terms of, you know, the types of skills a lot of lecturers have. I mean, we see it across the spectrum. You know, there's some really positive attitudes. Yes, COVID has created a lot of burnout, but yeah, I mean, there has been some positive aspects to it, and I mean, we consistently have to remind people of that, you know, this was kind of the spurt that online education really needed, because for many years, you know, educators could afford to ignore it to a degree. I know that's contentious to say, but it wasn't something they had to deal with. Forcing them to go online is, you know, enable them to kind of see exactly what type of skills they have and operate in a different space. I'm really hoping that, you know, the positive thing that we can get from COVID, obviously there wasn't many, is that educators feel really empowered now because they've gone through this experience, they've learned a lot of lessons, and that institution is going to make, institutions themselves are going to be far more enabled now to be able to tackle them in some of these questions, and particularly in context of the innovation that we're talking about as well.
Thank you. Nikki, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, let me respond. So we do a lot of training for lecturers throughout South Africa, actually with a couple of international clients as well. One of the biggest things that the first day when we do our training is really just to understand that ERTL that we did is not online education. It's not quality education. It's let's be honest, it's emergency, right? So I mean, we have examples of lecturers that used to teach a Hoppers 2 session on a Thursday. So what they did is they made a Hoppers 2 session on a Thursday on Zoom, right? And that's now what they classed as the online learning, online teaching. So what we've really worked with them, we offer a 5-day program that we offer, which is fully online course for them. And a lot of times the lecturers, it's the first time they've actually experienced, and I'm going to put a feather in my hat and I'm going to say, a well-designed, well thought out, fully online course as a learner. So they really experience that. I've had such, well, I always say I love my job because I get to work with different faculty from different universities. And I've had such a great experience because to see how they develop, and more importantly, the biggest thing that comes out of those is the communities it builds. Because I worked at a higher education institution for 15 years, I'm showing my age, and I didn't know people that worked in other faculties. They were in the building next to me, they were doing fantastic work, I didn't know anything about it. What's great about our it's called the Digital Training Expert Series. So when the lecturers join that, it's often cross disciplines. We often find out lots of ways that even though your discipline is very different, how can we learn from each other? And those communities of learning that we have between lecturers is amazing. And that's also like one of my biggest takeaways on that course that we actually have is those communities, because going forward, there's assignments and activities they have to do. So they stay in contact, and then of course they still stay in contact and build those relationships going forward.
Thank you, David. I see that you wanted to jump on that point as well.
Right, just very briefly. No, absolutely excellent. Particularly the discussion on hybridity and experiential learning. I want to touch on a point that was made earlier pertaining to the actual engagements that we have in facilitating sessions. I'm grateful for what Nikki has touched on, the fact that you know, as a lecturer who will be facilitating, you have now undergone an experience, you have seen it, you have done it for yourself, and now you're able to essentially transfer what it is you have learned. I think that's very important. The level in which we apply this, I think, is also very important. I was giving a couple of sessions this year, and you know, always mixing it up, which I think is very important. I remember I was following the UN General Assembly, and to my surprise, I see BTS is performing at the UN, biggest boy band in the world. So I was giving a section on diplomacy, and I said, well, this is a new form of diplomacy that we're looking at, essentially. So, you know, I play BTS for the students and they go wild. And did we not have the highest engagement I have ever seen of any session ever? And, applying the digital tools that we have, you can use polls, you can use Q&As, there's a lot of things you can do. I believe most institutions at this point are using Blackboard Collaborate or something similar. And I've also heard of similar interfaces within the Coursera space. Like you said, it's important that not only sitting there in front of a screen and speaking for 2 hours, but ensuring that students are actually engaged. That's the first point. The second point on experiential learning is that it really goes beyond the classroom. DERCO has an experiential learning program, which I attended in my first year, and I still apply what I learned within that program today. Today, I'm doing a master's in diplomatic studies, and you find that when you are able to carry out in action, it sticks with you for much longer. So applying that experience within a hybrid space, I think, is very important. I think it's something that we are very much learning to do within the academic space. And I think far beyond COVID, we will see it simply grow and expand.
Thank you, David. Maybe we should start playing BTS videos at the start of these sessions to increase our engagement as well. Is that a no from Nikki? A very, very sincere no. No problem, we won't. Sandil, did you want to jump in on that?
No, actually, I wanted to touch in on something that Nikki said. It's very true, Nikki, that the idea was to go online as universities when COVID-19 struck us, and even before. But we found ourselves crossing a bridge called ERT. We got stuck in the middle of that bridge. Online is still ahead. And I fear now that a number of us may be putting up tents right in that middle of that bridge, unwilling to cross entirely to online, and at the same time knowing fully well that there is no going back. So a challenge that is facing us now is to how to coax our academics to go all the way to online, because in real terms, actually, it is in that online, real full online, that you will see some workload relief for academics, real workload relief. And that will enable academics to free them up to focus within that online environment on building these new skill sets into the curriculum that are able to equip students for the workplace without overworking themselves. I like that point that you raised there. Thank you.
I'm interested to hear, Sandil, what you think. You mentioned going fully online, but it seems like a lot of institutions and learners are calling for that hybrid blended model moving forward. And maybe we can't allow educators to pick fully online or fully remote. They have to adapt and do that asynchronous approach. Do you think that's something that is possible?
I do, actually. I think it's possible. Currently, the blending, even coupled with the flipped classroom approach, is working very well for us. It just is associated with a hell of a lot of stress. Hence, you see a lot of mental, an escalation in mental unwellness, both amongst academics as well as students. And so we like it, we're experiencing it, but it has many drawbacks. It is possible to sustain the blended learning, especially through the flipped classroom approach. But I don't think it is ideal. What is ideal, in my view, is to take ourselves all the way to fully online, wherein we take the back seat and become the true facilitators that we've always wanted to be as academics. And to be take the back seat and be the true resources that we've always wanted to be for students. So that students now do this thing asynchronously, and then they come back to us to appeal to us as resources. The other thing, of course, which is highly required now to achieve that fully online capability, is to really train our students for self-directed learning, because there is no online without self-directed learning. And also to train our academics not to be threatened by students taking charge of their own learning as if suddenly they're going to be out of job or this and that. No, to actually say, let them learn, give them the capability to learn in a self-directed manner. And wait, they're going to come back to you. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a really excellent point. Miles, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
So yeah, I mean, the flexibility point is a good one, but I think it's just important to just draw a nod to the fact that we have specific contexts for learners in this country as well. So I mean, we have to consistently think about that. There's a lot of educators, I think we said it already earlier, that are extremely burnt out because, you know, they're just dealing with the challenges that are faced by every single one of the students in this country. And I think it's fair to say it affects those that are experiencing severe inequality all the way through to those that have, you know, have all the devices. It's been as challenging for all of them as well. But the point I wanted to make is that, and this speaks directly to what kind of Sandile was saying, is that, you know, now that we have all these lessons, and I think educators, there has to be a recognition that this flexibility, particularly around digital education, it's part of what you do as an educator. So I mean, you have a responsibility to your specific subject, and you're an expert in that. But as an educator, you know, you can't draw away from these conversations anymore. It's part of your professional practice as an educator now. And so that should really be combined into one kind of response, taking on board all of these aspects. So, and again, you know, talking to the aspect of experience, so much is being learned. Let's make sure we take that into kind of a new definition for what that facilitator is, what that online educator is, because technology is now a core part of what you are as an educator. So even if you're going to go back to mainly blended, and I mean, that sounds like a very established or highly preferred way of going back to teaching, that's fine. But technology really needs to be part of that. So continue to be part of those conversations, continue to allow for space in your teaching practice to investigate new ideas. And then again, I think that again points to a nod in the flexibility in the curriculums and the support from institutions, and then thinking about, you know, third parties like Coursera that has enabled you to have access to all this great content so that you can really create something extra special.
Thank you, Miles. And Brenda, did you want to jump in there as well?
I just wanted to emphasize there are 2 points that I want to, one, I want to ask you whether we will talk about it, but the first one I want to cover is that this idea of self-directed learning is, I think it's here to stay, and it's definitely something that will only grow. And so you guys are in the market of that whole area, but every individual is now able to access learning opportunities of their choice. And so you, in the careers field, we talk about a careers portfolio approach rather than a career pathway. So you can set yourself up for changing direction at any point, and ensuring that you're not at the mercy of these all of these things that happen around the system. So that's just a point I wanted to make, a link to agency, and that should apply also to academics who are in that space, and not be threatened, as Sandile has said, recognizing that as soon as one area is self-driven and directed by students, something else can get attention. So that openness. The question I wanted to ask around whether we would get to it is there's just the articulation and self-assessment of skills, because that's an area that's quite problematic. INUX, the International Education Career Services Network, they put out this data point the other day that I took note of. 30% of students misassess themselves in terms of their skills capability. And that's quite a significant thing. So one of the things we have on our radar is to enable and develop articulation around skills, and really understanding what the differences are between a skill, a talent, and maybe a preference, you know, which is something that a passion. So those are some of the things. I just wondered if we would get to that, but let me leave it back to you.
Thank you, Brenda. No, it's a really interesting point. I think sometimes assessment is the last thing that we talk about in sessions like this. We're so busy thinking about how to deliver it that we don't really consider that actually for lots of students, assessment really is the kind of crux of the whole reason that they're there. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'd love to use that time to speak about assessment. You mentioned equipping students with the ability to articulate their own skills and to, I guess, even understand what their own skills are. Nikki, did you want to jump in there, or we can circle back?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when we're talking about assessing our own skills, I think we should talk about peer assessment, because I think it's very underrated. And peer assessment doesn't just assess that skill that's currently being done, but that's all those critical cross-field skills. So like social skills, the communication skills, teamwork, conflict management, all those things that you actually want to prepare the learners to have, because when they're going to be working out wherever they are, they need to have those skills as well. I call them the hard skills because they're known as the soft skills, and I always think they're far from soft. They're very hard. But that's just, I thought we could add that to that discussion as well.
Thank you. Sandil, did you want to speak to us a little bit about your experience with those assessment objectives? And
well, yes, you know, David, you spoke about your legal training enterprise at UP, which is well known, and how it is out there in the industry rather than at the Hartfield campus or wherever, which is a great thing. And even greater is the notion now of workplace-based assessment, because that notion starts to say now, okay, in Hartfield you can assess the theory, but in the courtroom and in those law firms, that's where the industry is going to assess whether this is going to give us what we need in this firm. We're going to get, if they're looking for skills in litigation, are we going to get this skill? And they test that. Workplace-based assessment is very critical in the ways in which we want to prepare our students now for the world of work and service.
thank you. Brenda, sorry, I see that your hand's still raised there. Did you? No, that's okay, not a problem. I'd like to speak a little bit more though about the peer assessment. I think that seems to be something that's resonated with our audience there, and also that workplace assessment. David, perhaps you could speak to us about if those are things that you're integrating in curriculums. No problem. It looks like we might have lost David for a second there. But Francis, please go for it.
I didn't put my hand up, you just saw my mouth move, so well done. Becoming more of a data-driven, institution or organization is something we hear a lot about. How do we measure the success? How do we measure the skill development? How do we do any of these things around data? And I think that's really been a challenging area. One of the things that we've seen from other institutions, globally, as when you're looking at your own learner base and their skill proficiency, you get a picture of your students' skill proficiency, but how does that compare to what the proficiency should be if you're entering it into a certain country, into a certain industry? Do you know what the skill proficiency of your learners should be if they're entering the finance sector in South Africa? And that's where I think things become very exciting. If you can leverage that kind of data to make decisions about what kind of skill development and content your learners need, that's when you can start making, I think, really exciting business decisions based on the data that you'd had. But I'd love to hear, I don't want to take things off point, and I know David's got a comment as well, but I'd love to get a feel from people in the room about how do we measure success other than just our students are employable by this percentage by this time? Are we measuring the proficiency of skills, and how are we doing that, and should we be doing more?
David, please go for it.
Right, thank you. Apologies for that, just technical difficulties. Great point. Just want to touch on the point of assessments first. So assessments happen at very many levels, at the departmental level, in ordinary departmental meetings. These are some of the elements that are discussed at a faculty level, at faculty board meetings. I was very impressed sitting in quite a few of them, the depth of discussion and assessment that happens there at an undergraduate level, you'll find it's more uniform. At the postgraduate level, it really has to do with the specific research area targeted by students. We have the Teaching and Learning Committee, we have the Senate, which is a statutory body, so we see it sort of at every level. So what we see is it is sort of zoomed in depending on exactly what level it is that we are dealing with at the time. But yes, it does occur. On the point that was made by Francis, I think that's one of the biggest questions that we all remain with. But I also think it's a question that we will not all agree upon in terms of the answer, because essentially we're asking, what is the best measuring stick to use? And I might argue that my measuring stick is better than yours because it is taller and it has more centimeters. Or you might argue, no, mine is better because it's wider and we can get a full scope, or mine is circular, or whatever the case may be. I think, in short, it has to do with how we see development in reflection, meaning that sort of retroactively have things improved. And the difficulty there is we would only be able to know sort of in a post-assessment context, and passively as more to an active case. But I do think that's the most proficient way to look at how assessments are efficient.
Thank you, David. We've got about 3 minutes left of our session today. So I'd love to hear from you, Miles, before we finish up.
Yeah, so in answering Francis, and on top of what David has said, I think, obviously the key reasons we go to university at the end of the day is to improve our critical thinking skills, and we want to emerge from that institution with that, particularly obviously within our level of specialization, but so that we can emerge into the workplace and be, kind of fully functioning and able to deal with the challenges that we know are going to come. So potentially one of the ways that we could measure that is how well recent graduates actually acclimatize to assessment around professional education, because let's be honest, COVID has really enforced that. Probably most professional education is going to include some, if not all, some format of digital education, and whether it's being online. A lot of programs have gone on online now. So most graduates are going to have to very quickly be able to acclimatize to gathering new skills in their workplace themselves. So that's an easy way for institutions to kind of focus on being able to build those types of skills so that their graduates can readily take up new skills as they emerge, because things are moving so quickly. So we have to recognize that.
Thank you very much. So that does bring us to the end of our session today. I'd like to thank our panel again for joining us, sharing your insights. I really enjoyed our discussion. So thank you for that. And also to our audience for being very active in that chat box on the side. I was struggling to keep up a little bit, but it was great to hear all of your opinions and to address some of your questions as well. There will be an on-demand video of the session today and also a summary article. So please do revisit that if you'd like to take another look at what we've spoken about. But for now, I'll just say again, thank you to our panel, thank you to our audience, and goodbye.